All right. All that to say, there are so many things that we want to be able to do, but usually there's a lot of work to get there. Like, when I was younger, I couldn't sing at all. I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but I wanted to. So I took the time to study how the human voice works. Not how singing works, but just how the human voice works and how, certain muscles and certain nerves are triggered in different ways to make things happen. Learned that, got through to where I was somewhat competent, but thought I was bigger stuff than I was, as some of us often do, and decided I needed to be taught more formally. Went through that, and here we are now. I mean, it's the same when you want to learn, like, an instrument or another language or anything that you think might help your day-to-day. But what we're going to address today, as we wrap up the series called Rhythm, is along those same lines. Sometimes how we feel about learning an instrument or learning a foreign language can feel similar to how we feel about growing in our faith. We know what we want, but it can be difficult to know where to start when it comes to getting there. And even though we know that, when it comes to growing in our relationship with Christ, consistency is key. It often feels boring and difficult, just like memorizing flashcards or test notes or anything not fun that can fall into that category. Think about the people you know that seem like good Christians. Does it seem like they have the whole Bible memorized backward and forward, can sing any worship song on demand, know all the answers to the tough questions, pray about everything and always get those prayers answered? Somehow it's like you know how to do all the stuff, how you're supposed to do it all, but somehow it doesn't seem like a chore to them. They may even act like they like it. But if we're honest, even after tracking with us in this series, you'd admit that some of those things are still pretty tough to do. Memorizing Bible verses doesn't always make it on the priority list, not to mention that you don't know where to start with which ones you should memorize sometimes. Or maybe all the worship songs are great, but you'd honestly rather listen to insert relevant artist here. Maybe praying feels pointless or weird, even though you know something that will help you feel more connected to God. All of a sudden, it's like growing closer and doing a bunch of boring, hard-to-do stuff over and over and over and over again. Stuff you don't like, stuff you don't feel like you're good at. I mean, is this walking with God? Is this what it looks like? Becoming a boring, disciplined person who becomes a Christian robot, the perfect churchgoer? If you feel like this today, relax. I bet many of us have felt this at some point or another. And the last thing I'm going to try to do is force you to become something that you're not. But at the same time, it's important that you know that sometimes following God does require you to discipline yourself. Disciplining yourself in areas you don't naturally want to. Sometimes doing the things we've talked about in this series is good for us to do, but not necessarily easy to do. But here's the deal. I had a boss that threw that around all the time. He'd walk in the room. Here's the deal. Today we are not going to add another thing to that list. We're going to talk about a way that you can grow closer to God by doing something that is completely easy to you, something you like to do. But before we get to that, I'd like to share something that's written by Peter, who was closer to Jesus than any of us could imagine. Not only was Peter a disciple of Jesus, but he was also one of Jesus' closest friends. Later in his life, he wrote a letter of encouragement to some people in Asia Minor who were going through some tough times. He simply wanted to help them move towards being better followers of Christ. In his letters, Peter always seemed to focus on the grace of God. In other words, all the behavior that should be motivated out of God's deep love for us. Regardless of how perfectly or imperfectly we act, we don't deserve God's love, but he gives it freely anyway. He writes in 1 Peter 4:10 through 11, God has given each of you a gift from his variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. Do you have the gift of speaking? Then speak as though God himself were speaking through you. Do you have the gift of helping others? Do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. Then everything you do will bring glory to God through Jesus Christ. All the glory and power to him forever and ever. Amen. Look at the first sentence in that verse. God has given each of you a gift. Peter understood that God was the inventor of talents, personalities, strengths, and abilities. In fact, he has a great variety of them according to this passage. Some of them are specifically spiritual, like the ones Peter mentioned, and others are natural-born talents. But no matter what you're good at, there's a way you can use that honors and brings you closer and others closer to God. Think of it this way. Do some of you have a musical talent that you're pretty sure you got from one of your parents? Maybe you have a mom or a dad who's talented in music, and it was like in your gene pool, you were born into it. Maybe some of you have a skill that you developed because a coach or a teacher taught it to you. Maybe some of you are good at baseball because you had an older brother or sister that used to beat you in it day after day and made you better. Here's a basic illustration. Maybe some of you have a better sense of humor because you have a friend who was hilarious, and being friends with them simply made you funnier all the time. We develop talents and abilities based on who we know and how we use the things around us. In the psychology world, they call that nature and nurture. Here's a way that a website puts it. Nature is what we think of as pre-wiring and is influenced by genetic inheritance and other biological factors. Nature is generally taken as the influence external factors after conception, like the product of exposure, experience, and learning on the individual. That's a fancy way of saying that some traits we are born with, others are learned. Those are our gifts, and more than nature and nurture, your gifts and talents from God. Peter continues to say in that passage, use them well to serve one another. Remember that he's speaking to a group of Christ followers. He's talking about people using what they're good at to build the church, their community, and ultimately draw people to Jesus. No matter what the gift is, Peter's principle still applies. Use it to serve others and use it to serve God. So what talents does he want to use? Start by thinking about the ones you already have. What are some things you guys are just good at that you like doing, that comes easy to you? Okay. Sports, dance. What about things you think are, okay, I'm good at this, but there's no possible way this could ever be useful to anybody but me, and it's probably not even useful to me? Okay, see, that's kind of cool. That might fall directly into that category. I don't think I can use that as a good example, but cool. Matthew can chew gum and sing, but apparently that's normal. I do the same thing. I'm just picking on you. Oh, man. Oh, man. Okay, well, we'll go down some examples here. Are you good at social media? Well, God can use that. Did you know that there are tons of churches and ministry organizations that hire people specifically to manage their social media for their church or organization? Are you good at connecting with people? Like, can you make friends with everybody? And you know that's the relational talent that God has given you to serve others? Are you good at sports or acting or playing video games? Every one of those things and more are incredible gifts and tools that God's given you that you can use to help others. Not only can God use your gifts and talents to help others, it's a way he can draw you closer to him. That's why Peter said, do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. In other words, learn to lean on God with your talent that he has put in you. Let him continue to develop your talent that's already inside of you. How can you create a rhythm around worshiping God with your talent? Well, first you must identify what you're good at. Some of you will know immediately. For others, it might take some time. Start by asking some people around you what you're good at, if you can't immediately identify one or more of your talents. Ask someone who you love and knows you, and they'll point you to things that you may not have ever thought of as a talent. Don't demand that your talents are the same as your close friends. Don't get upset if they don't say what you're hoping you would hear. Take their words as gifts, a gift that helps you identify your gifts. Then see if there's a way that you can use one of those gifts to serve others. Start inside your church. Is there a way you can use one of your talents to help someone else? For example, let's say you're good at singing. Maybe you could give some lessons to younger kids in church. Maybe you could teach the kids lessons to use their time together and speak into their lives. This is a canned example that I'm not going to use. Nope, we're not going to use it. How can you create a rhythm around worshiping God with your talent? What are you good at? Is it possible to use your talent to serve others? Just like Peter says it in the verse, all the glory and power to him forever. When it comes to God, with how he has uniquely created you, it's God's power working inside you. And his talent that he's already placed inside you. So there is all you have to do is use what you're already good at to draw the attention to him. It's simple, but it starts with taking a small step. So just take a minute to ask. And this message is a slippery slope in a lot of ways that I've figured out, because I've had the issue in my life where I know I am 150% better than whoever at XYZ, but that's not my calling. That's not my place. That's not what God put on me to do. So you have to think of that too. Like, I'm the best singer in the room by far. I'm not saying that pompously as me. I'm using it as an example before this gets taken out of context. But he might have put it on somebody else who is substantially less talented in the eye of the general public than me to be the one that's going to win a nation, or the one that's going to win the next American Idol-esque show. So that's something to keep in mind with all this too, because I can't really think of the best way to put it, but you control your destiny to a pretty reasonable extent, and human free will does exist. But just because it exists does not mean it's something to be exercised all the time, especially when it's in a situation like this. So do some real searching on that last note. I mean, yeah, you might be good at 25 things, and you might like doing this one thing more than the other 24, but that might not be what he gave you to serve his people.